लाली मेरे लाल की जित देखूं. So anyway, everybody, please welcome Preeti Sidhu and Manat Sidhu. Hopefully you can see them on the screen. I've spotlighted them. Preeti is a fashion textile enthusiast who took the initiative to preserve Fulkari, which had become redundant and lost its elegance. For the last 10 years, she has worked with several women from villages across Punjab, providing them employment opportunities and a chance of expression. Her daughter, Manat, grew up amongst Fulkari and recently teamed up with her mother to document and preserve Fulkari to bring it to the younger generation. Manat is currently studying at FIT in New York to preserve the legacy of Fulkari. So welcome very much, and I thank you very much for coming on at this unearthly hour. Okay, great. So lovely. So I'll just give you a little background on Fulkari. Fulkari is the folk embroidery of Punjab. And as you can see from my backdrop, I hope this is not going to come down mid presentation because I've kind of rigged it up. I didn't want to pin it up or anything. It's been loaned by some dear friends, Punjabi friends, when they heard that I was giving this talk, and it's absolutely gorgeous, but we'll get back to that. I'm so excited about this one. So Fulkari is a folk embroidery of Punjab, most often hand embroidered on dupatta, which is the shawl or the scarf that is worn by the women of Punjab. Its significance is deeply rooted in Punjabi culture. From birth through adolescence, marriage, childbirth, and death, Fulkari is a constant companion in a woman's life. And Fulkari managed to survive even as families fled during the India-Pakistan partition. But then it lost much to commercialization and machine copies. So our speakers, Preeti and Manat Sidhu, are a talented mother-daughter duo who overcame challenges to document and revive the original designs, motives, and lexicon of Fulkari embroidery. So we'll get started with our presentation. Let's take it away. Fulkari, let's finally get started. So Manat, do you want to tell us something about the origins of Fulkari?
Yes, so Fulkari is from Punjab in India. So typically before the partition of 1947, there was one Punjab, that was a unified Punjab which spread across India and Pakistan. So the highlighted area which you can see in the image is part of, like the one on the right side of the black thick border is the Indian part of, current part of India. And the one on the other side on the left is Pakistan part of Punjab. So both of the countries still have Punjab, and that's where Fulkari was practiced in earlier times.
Okay.
So giving an idea of India, so it's in the northern part. So the red highlighted part is where Punjab is and where currently we are. And, working with the artisans to revive Fulkari. So first and foremost is what exactly would a Fulkari be? So Fulkari is basically two words, full and kari. Full in Hindi or Punjabi means flower, and kari is handwork. So it's basically the handwork of flowers. So they're hand embroidering the flowers. It's a traditional art form from Punjab. And it was, so one of the most unique things about it that it's an heirloom, and it's done for the daughters by the women of the family. So it runs through the women of the family. So the grandmother or the mother will make it for the daughter, and then it's passed so on and so forth. So the pictures which you see along are those of a Fulkari. Okay, so I will now talk about the purpose. So like I said before, Fulkari was in older times, it was just given throughout the family to the daughters. And back then we did not have shopping malls or different places to go around. So the main place where people showed off their fulkaris, because they were, they had much more of a significance back then, because your mother had hand embroidered them herself. So when you're showing it off, so it was primarily in three different places, which was marriage. So on marriages, it was a new chapter which a woman started in her life. So a lot of fulkaris went from her home itself as a part of dowry. There were fulkaris which were given by the in-laws to the woman, and they were all a symbol of status. So the number of fulkaris she had, the more embroidered and the look, that was like you are more higher up in the society, the status of society. So yeah, that was one of the purposes. I'll be telling you all three of these in detail in the coming slides. So I'll just give a little glimpse over here. Then was a birth of a child.
Oops, sorry, hang on just a sec. Okay, carry on, Anand.
So the second one was the birth of a child. So like I mentioned, so even giving a birth to a child is also like a new chapter from becoming a woman to a mother. And so there was also an important occasion, and for the child itself, so they usually wrap the child. So when they first got the child, they usually wrapped the newborn in a fulkari. Usually this was an old fulkari, which was of the grandmother herself. So this was also because the older the fulkari is, the cloth gets softer, and it's not that harsh on the child's body and the skin of the newborn. And then the last purpose was festive occasions, because that was one time when everyone met each other and you actually saw other people, and it was a symbol of fashion for that time. So next. Okay. So for marriages, so there's this fulkari called a sirpallu, which has a triangle on the top. So it comes over here like this. So it looks like a special design, which is just for the head. Sir means head in Hindi or Punjabi. So that is primarily used by the brides. And other than that, it's used as a canopy in all the wedding rituals. So before before this, like before there were cars in this generation, so a dolly used to go. All the Indian audience was there, they probably know what a dolly is. So it used to be the whole bride ceremony used to go by foot. So over there, it was the fulkari was on top of them. They were usually the brothers who carry the fulkari, giving it like a shade or a canopy on the bride and the groom. Right now, currently, when they go in a car, so on the hood of the car, people usually have their fulkaris tied, the old fulkari or heirlooms, which are there. And yeah, it's still an important part for the wedding ceremonies in Punjab specifically. So yeah, next. Okay. So on birth of a child, this is actually a very less known fact. In fact, we too like found it very recently, and so we do not really have any pictures to count for it. But usually after the first bath, after the child was born, they were wrapped in a fulkari. This is also a tradition we are trying to revive back. So probably with a muslin cloth or something which is soft enough so that a child would not have any harsh rashes or something on the skin because of the cloth. But yes, they were wrapped in an old fulkari.
So now, Manat, I guess you have to wait for the fulkaris, the ones that you're making, for them to get so old so that you can wrap a child that can be softened enough over the years so you can wrap a child. This is a fascinating tradition. And, we're going back, actually, with this tradition, we're going back. There's a lot of interest, particularly in the West, to wrapping your newborn babies in, say, something like peace silk, in California and so on. It's called Airy silk. So, this is something similar that's coming along. It's fascinating that this tradition has been lost and slowly it's being revived.
We are going to try that, Sheila, soon. We're going to come up with maybe silk, like you said, or muslin or something very soft with a little bit of fulkari. But before that, I think we need to really tell people that this was the tradition, because I don't think so many people know about this tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So first we need to make people aware of that, and then we are going to come up with that.
Right.
And I hope people do that, because they do need some soft material to wrap the baby.
Yes,
We tried that.
and how wonderful is that you wrap your baby in what a grandmother had embroidered and worn. So it's already got that, you know, everything imbued in the textile. So okay, so I love that idea. Carry on. So now we've got the
Okay,
functions.
so yeah, this is the function. So these are basically different festivals which are celebrated around Punjab. So this was the only time when you could showcase your creativity and your artwork and whatever you had made. So women also embroidered for themselves, embroidered for their daughters or granddaughters. And this was the place where you could show it off that, you know, my fulkari has probably more colors or more different designs and stuff like that. So the pictures you see here are from different festivals which are celebrated across Punjab. So the first one on the left is Tia. Tia typically means daughter. So this is a festival where all the married women, they come back home and they celebrate together. So they celebrate their the marriage and the long life with their friends who are there from their childhood. So all their friends who are now married to different places, they all come back and meet. So then they show, you know, typically during this time they wear fulkaris which were given by their in-laws. So as to, you know, show that okay, my in-laws, this is what they gave me, and this is what they gave me. So just to show it to your friends who've been there since your childhood.
That's so fascinating,
Then
and
yeah.
I love this, you know, the hand on the waist and a kind of real, you know, come hither look. The women look so confident because they've come back to the parents' home and they're showing off their finery. Look at the colors; it's fabulous. Yeah, carry on. Sorry, Manat.
It's okay. So the second picture is of Lodi. So Lodi is a winter festival. It's typically a harvest festival in winters. So since it's really cold, of course not as cold as it's in North America, we don't have snow here. But yeah, so we do have a campfire and people dance around it and celebrate the harvest of the season, and you know, just celebrate for general.
Yeah,
So,
lovely.
and
So
every
it's
time it's Fulkari, which is there with the ladies.
fabulous. All right, so let's dive straight into the history now.
Yeah. Okay. So, like I mentioned, so whenever like a lady was pregnant, so the lady's mother or the maternal grandmother of the child to be started embroidering the fulkari, irrespective of a boy or a girl. So once the child was born, they had a fulkari which was there for her or him. So whenever the child grew up, it's either given to the girl as on her wedding day, or it's given to your daughter-in-law on her wedding day as a part of the trousseau which went from the in-laws side. So it was all done in the family. It was never sold. It was just made by the women in the family. A large part of it was sent as a part of a dowry. So I still know some people who, like my great grandmother, so she used to tell mom that how they had actually full trunks full of fulkaris from her wedding, which she left in Pakistan during partition. So yeah, and
Yeah, so I just also wanted to clarify one thing because when you said that the fulkari would be made by the grandmother for the unborn child, so it could be either a girl or a boy, and so if it's a boy, I'm sure you'll come to this later, but it would be presented to the boys when he grew up, to the boy's
Yeah.
bride, right,
Yes,
Preeti?
yes,
yes. It was given to the bride at the wedding time. So there's a specific name for it. We'll discuss it later, which
Right.
was given from the boys' side to the girls. It's just not the girls who got the fulgaris. It had to be the other side too, because that was a status symbol as well. So the
Right.
better the fulgari, and of course from the boys' side, they were more intricate and massive ones, which they had to show that they are from a better family. The status had to be shown through the fulgaris.
Right. Fascinating. Okay.
yeah. So now I'll be like I mentioned before that lots of trunks of Fulkari were lost during the partition. So I'll be actually talking about the partition which happened in 1947. So that's when India and Pakistan became two different countries, and Punjab was one of the worst hit states over there. So during the time, it was like one day orders and people got that, all the Sikhs and Hindus, they need to move to India, and all the Muslims, they need to move to Pakistan. And
Sorry.
yeah. So people actually thought it was a temporary phase, that they'll probably go for a week and then they'll come back to collect this stuff. They just took the essentials, the bare essentials, and they went. But they never came back. So they never could get back all the material which they had. People had like trunks full of collected silks from the Silk Route or the Fulkaris. Everything was lost. The heirloom was lost. And prior to this, it was always made in the family. It was never sold to anyone. This is the first time after the partition, when people needed money, that they started selling Fulkaris and commercialization happened. And so the images on top, the one on the right, in the top, is of a city called Bhavalpur, which is in Pakistan. And this was the city where a lot of people who still have Fulkaris and who did Fulkari were based in. And when they moved to India, so the Maharaja of Patiala allocated a special village for them, which is now called Tripuri. And that's probably one of the only places where Fulkari is actively being made. And the first picture which you see on the slide is from that village where Fulkari is being made and being distributed around. So you can see a lot of colors from that place.
Right.
So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it was a very, very traumatic time at this point. And so would some of the vintage Fulkari that we see today in some collections, that would have come from before this time? I'm thinking, like, for example, even this one that is made on khadi, and it's already, you can see that it was woven, it was hand woven and hand spun on khadi cloth. So I'm thinking it would have come, like, that would have been pre 1947.
Yes,
probably.
most of the vintage Fulkaris are pre 47, and you'll see lots of Fulkaris being sold in Rajasthan and Gujarat as well, because whatever they got they're getting these from Pakistan. So either the ones which were left behind, or even in that part of the country also, they were practicing Fulkari. So a lot of things are coming from Pakistan as well.
Right.
And like I told you, my own great grandmother, she only was left with the keys, and they left lots of things in Pakistan, but her only regret was the trunk full of Fulkaris. And my grandmother, the daughter-in-law and the mother-in-law thing, and she always had to tell us this. She never gave me any, but she left them in Pakistan, all of them. So, it's a daughter-in-law, mother-in-law thing.
Yeah, well, all of us who are textile enthusiasts can relate to leaving behind a treasured textile, particularly the one that you've made and that you were hoping to pass on as your legacy. All right, so yeah, we've got motifs now. We can talk about motifs.
Yeah, so the motifs which were used in the Fulkaris were primarily geometric, and they were inspired from all the things around. Back then, obviously, we did not have Pinterest to search up designs and how things look. So it was all the things which were around us. So the flowers or wheat, birds, those were the things which were typically embroidered. There were also times when belen, which is used to cook rotis, was also used.
Rolling pin.
Yeah.
Rolling
pin. Mm-hmm. So yeah, even that was used in the embroidery. So there was all parts of inspiration, like from everyday things. And most of the designs, like I mentioned before, were geometric. And these are like all the images which you see right across are things which you can see and you can make out that what these are. But there are other motifs also, like the one which is there in Sheila's background. Those are very geometric, which I feel could also be possible because of the Persian influence, which was there in northern parts of India. So all Persian art, if you see, it's very, very geometric and has a lot of, geometry to it.
Right, and no kind of representation of I guess animals or floral representation or anything like that. No direct, because of Islam, I guess. And also I think because Fulkari is a counted thread, I recall seeing somewhere that you actually in the pre-partition, in those days, they didn't even have an embroidery frame. They would just make they would count the threads, and so that's why it would, I mean, make sense that it's geometric. So even when you see something like a camel here, you know, it looks like a geometric design. Yeah. Okay, so we'll get more into that. I know the presentation is going to take us a little bit further into this. So let's talk about Bagh, Fulkari, and Chop. Yeah.
Yes, so I have been talking about Bagh and Fulkari a lot in this slide. So I'll just give you an explanation about what exactly those are. So Fulkari is basically a broad term which includes all of them, Bagh also and Chop also, and all the other Fulkaris which are there. Whereas a Bagh, which typically means a garden in Hindi. So that is, Bagh is typically the one which is which fully covers the whole fabric. So the first two images, if you see, you really can't make out the color of the fabric or any place where the fabric is. It's all covered with the embroidery. So that's what a Bagh is. So like a garden full of flowers, it's a Bagh, which is full of these embroidered flowers which they have embroidered.
Fabulous.
And the second, the third image is of a Fulkari, a normal embroidered Fulkari. And the third one, the last one is a Chop. So Chop is a special kind of Fulkari, which is very, very geometric and has small, small squares. But the only thing special about it is that it's done in 4 times, and the front as well as the back, both of them look exactly the same. So I myself have tried it. It's really, really difficult to, do it. But because in the first go, you go once, you come back, and then you go again, you come back. So you really can't make out what's going to happen by the end of it when you're first doing it. And it takes a lot of patience to master this. Currently, also, we just know one person who is able to do it. And the way she does it is just so mesmerizing. And the best part is she does it without an embroidery frame and from the back of the Fulkari. So she embroiders from the back. And when you look at the front, it's exactly the same. In fact, it's very, very difficult to actually make out the front and the back. The only way I personally make out that, okay, this is the front or the back, is the straight lines which are made. So the straight lines are made in a normal stitch like the one which we do. So when you see it from the back, you really can't see the straight line. And that's how I personally recognize that, okay, this is the front and this is the back. That's similar.
And you're, I hear you're making, you're learning Chop yourself right now, Manath,
yes,
right?
Yes, I'm trying to learn it, though it's a very difficult art.
Very difficult,
but
yes.
I hope to pass on the legacy to at least someone, because there's just one person we know who does it right now.
It's a dying art. No, not many artisans do it. Only, like very few are left. And since it's very difficult, the others are not really in to learn it as well.
I was in Morocco on a textile tour, and we actually took in a workshop in Farsi embroidery, which is the embroidery of Fes. And again, it's the form that was patronized by the royal families, and it was very similar to Chop. I remember, I mean, not that I could even make more than 5 stitches because it was so fiendishly difficult, but it was similar. You had to work from the back, and the back and the front was actually the same. And again, it was this sort of thing. So there's a lot of I think just because fabric is fabric, and there's certain rules that you have to follow in counting, and if it's going to look like on the front and the back, which is very prized even in Morocco, that there's certain motifs that are very similar. So it's fascinating how this transcends geography. Okay, so
actually, yeah, that could be possible, that the roots of this also could be from there, because I do know that Guru Nanak Dev Ji, he had traveled to Persia, and a lot of in Punjab, there are lots of things which are directly inspired from Persian architecture or art. So this could also probably be from there, now that you say that you've said something similar.
So Arab, Persian, I mean, that whole region is so intertwined. All right, are we ready to move on, Manath?
Yes.
Next one. Okay, so we're getting into some common Fulkari now.
So these are some of the common Fulkaris which you will find if you're searching on the net. So this is a thirma. Thirma was usually on a white base and with red or a hot pink embroidery and touches of green. So this was basically worn by elderly women in the family for any kind of a function, or it was worn by the widows. So there would be some firmas in the family for the elderly women, or if a woman lost her husband, so red was really not the base color. It would have been too red. So red signifies a married woman. So and if she was a widow, then she would wear lighter colors. So that's why there were firmas which were on lighter base. So this one, the one on the left, has been copied by us. We have tried to copy the original one. There's an original one on the right, which is which is a vintage bag. And so we've just tried to copy it, and that's a firma which we have made.
All right. And so is this tradition also changing, Preeti,
No, not anymore. Not anymore. As I told you, even people are not really aware of the firma. But yes, they like this because it's different. It's not like those usual reds and hot pinks. And we have married girls buying this recently. Somebody kept it in her trousseau because she loved it, and she teamed up with a red suit. But she liked it. So this tradition is not. It's not only left for elderly or the widows, but everybody's wearing it.
It's very beautiful, and I'm thinking just, I mean, I would love to have a firma, for example, but then culturally, I know that it's sometimes inappropriate to wear. Me being a married woman with, I mean, sure, my childbearing years are long past, but I would hesitate to wear something that would denote widowhood, because our cultures are so tied to, I think, superstition as well, as in if I wear a firma, I'm prompting the fates. I'm saying, okay, I want to be a widow. So that's not the case anymore, is it?
No, it's not the case anymore.
Okay, that's wonderful to know. Okay, so let's
We are very selective, we just take the traditions which we want to, and where we don't want, it's okay. We can play around with it.
Yeah, no, for sure. This is the best part about traditions, constantly evolving. So tell us about Sanchi now.
Yeah, this is a Sanchi bag. This usually tells a story. So you can see lots of figures in there. You can see animals, you can see birds, you can see flowers, you can see human figures. So Sanchi bag is usually, it has a story around it. So they weave a story into a bag. So it's not a very common one, but this was a way of narrating some kind of a story. So we have recently done a Sanchi bag with a partition story. So we had these people who witnessed partition, who were very, very young during the partition time. So these people, we had their recordings. They told what happened, how they escaped from Pakistan. And then that same video was shown to the artisan, and we told her what we wanted. So a train was made, some people with swords and all. So a whole story was depicted on one bag. So this is what Sanchi bag is all about. It's all about the story.
Fabulous.
Yeah. You'll see some Sanchi bags with the story of Ramayana as well, and there was one bag which had the names also, Hanuman, and that way they had written names as well. So basically a story.
Yes, I see that there's people riding on horses or camels, it seems like that. And then there's a plethora of, like what looks like birds, but it almost looks like bird boats, or, it obviously is showing there's some transition, some journey happening here. So maybe would this be where, say, like a population was on the move, or would that be the time when a Sanchi was made or recorded a particular, event?
Yeah, this is, I think any event, that depends on the one who made it. Maybe she wanted to narrate a story through it. So she kind of made it whatever she saw around. So, yeah.
Fascinating. Okay, so here we have the Sarpalu.
Yeah, this is a Sarpalu, which Manath has already mentioned. Sar means head. So this was basically a part of it. Here you can see towards the right in the center.
Okay.
It has some kind of a design, a jewelry kind of a design. So Sar meant head. So this part was supposed to cover the head. and it seemed like jewelry, like a lady is wearing the jewelry on top of her head or something. So Sar Pallu was embroidery done, of course, on the whole of the dupatta, but especially on the head area, the part which was to cover the head had some kind of a design. So from far away, it would look like some kind of a jewelry worn on the head. So, could be people who could not afford all that kind of jewelry there, because they used to have this jewelry for the head as well. So people maybe who could not afford that much gold or something, so they embroidered the dupatta in that manner so that it seemed as if they were wearing jewelry.
Fascinating. Yes, that's beautiful. Just beautiful. Okay, so here we have a Nilak.
Yeah, Nilak, the name is Neela. Neela means blue in Hindi or Punjabi. Neela is blue. So, though there are very few, you will get blue or black colored parts. You'll get very few blue or black fulkaris. So, all the blue and black fulkaris were called Nilak. Nilak is blue. That maybe they dyed it in indigo or a black color, and then any kind of embroidery. This is a sanchi on nilak, on blue color, but it could be any geometrical pattern or a floral pattern. It could be anything. So any black or a blue fulkari was called as nilak.
So, and here the motifs are very interesting. I see there's a couple of wrestlers here, and that's a big part of Punjabi culture, isn't it? Where you have the akharas, which are the gyms, the wrestling gyms, and in fact, I think India's first Olympic gold medal was in wrestling, the very first one, I think. And also, there's a lot going on here. So again, this is almost like
a sanchi.
Documentation.
This is like a sanchi on a black base,
on a,
so,
a black or a nilak base. Yes. And why do you think they favored red over indigo, which there was a lot of in India? There was a lot of indigo, but they favored red or orange back the ground.
Maybe this part of Punjab, there was no indigo growing here. And plus, in our culture, black is not very auspicious. So they don't wear it for the weddings or any functions. Black is not really worn. It wasn't earlier, but of course now people have started wearing. But till date, my grandmother or my mother also, she never has a black suit. My mother doesn't wear blacks. I mean, maybe she's just taken it from her mother, that black is not the right color. Yeah,
right. And I guess indigo would be close to black. So the blues also were not
so
favored.
Very rarely you'll find this color in fulkari.
Okay. So just a reminder, everybody, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat at this point. You can start writing them in, and we're getting towards towards the end in a few minutes. So if you have any questions, you can please put them in the chat. So we'll get right into some popular bags here. And I think Preeti is going to tell us more about the Bawan bag.
This is a Bawan bag. Bawan in Hindi or Punjabi means 52. So this has 52 boxes. It has 52 designs in it, and it was a really intricate one. I mean, it's very difficult to get 52 designs into it. You can't think of. So we kind of use this as our, a sample thing from where we pick up designs, because 52 designs you get at one go. So probably, this is what we think. Maybe at that time also, this was a mother wanted to teach her daughter the designs, and this is how it came into being. She kept teaching her all the different designs, and then this is how the Bawan bag came into being. 52
so it could be a bit of a sampler as well, couldn't it? Because it would be different designs in each block. And would these designs be replicated at all in the whole?
No. So no, you can see in there, you hardly see any duplicate design anywhere. It's just the borders towards the end. Otherwise, there's a new design.
Right. So this is very interesting, because it's recalling the Garchola of Gujarat, which is actually it's also on a grid pattern. It's a red sari that is given to the bride upon the time that is considered during the wedding ceremony, that the bride actually goes over to the bridegroom side of the family. And for that, it's actually done in bandhani, which is, this very intricate tie-dye, the hand knotting. And it's something similar. So, it's interesting how the tradition has gone through, but I don't think it was done as a sampler. So that's very interesting when you say that this might be a sampler.
Even I don't think it's a sampler, but this is what Mannat came up with, because this is how the younger generation perceives it. She says, even I would think it as a sampler, I mean, this is how I would learn.
Right.
And I said, yeah, maybe,
It's a good idea. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. And now this is a chand. This is one of my favorites.
Yeah, this is a chand bagh. Chand means moon. So this was basically a white color is used on a black background, but you can hardly see the background because it's almost full. So why it's called chand bagh? Because it it shines like
sorry.
White color shines like silver.
Oops, hang on. Sorry.
One bag.
I'm just, this is so sensitive. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So this white color, it shines like silver when it is done on this bagh, and when it's so close, from far away, it feels like silver. We've also done a copy of this. And actually, when I gave white thread, I was not too sure. But when it came out, it actually shines. Like the silver looks beautiful. So it's called as Chand Bagh. It gives a feeling of the moon.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and these wouldn't have been for any kind of festival regarding, like, say, Sharad Punam, which would have been the moon festival to honor the moon. Many cultures in India have that, where they would have, on a full moon night, they dress in white. This wouldn't have been for that?
No, nothing like that. It's just that maybe the black and the white. So on the black base, the mostly white is embroidered. So just trying to depict a knight, a black knight with the white thread, which looks silver.
And this also would not be age related. This would not be, say, older people wear it because it's not got so much red.
No, nothing related to age.
All right. And we have the Varida Bagh.
Varida Bagh, as the name suggests. Vari is the thing which comes from the groom's side during the wedding for the girl. And this usually golden in color. You can see the first image on the left, that is completely embroidered in golden color. It looks like a piece of gold. So usually from the boy's side, because it had to be shown to all the relatives of the girl's side, and people had to see what the status of the family is. So they had to be beautiful and more intricate. So this is a Varika Bagh, which looked as if, you're giving something in gold.
Right. And, carry on, sorry.
Yeah, usually it was in yellow color and very, very intricate.
All right, so my mind's still looping around the fact that, okay, so there's this woman, she's married, she goes to the in-laws' house, and then she is pregnant. And at that point that she's pregnant, the maternal grandmother starts embroidering something, and so does the paternal grandmother? No. And how do they know that it's going to be?
It's usually the maternal grandmother who starts doing that. No, I think they just start it on their own, once a daughter gets married. So every day they would embroider. So they would start it on their own. And once they know it's a boy, then they would start going in for a golden color. And, and as such, there were huge families. A boy would be born, they would wait for a boy to be born. They would keep taking chances. So there would be a boy in the family, of course.
At some point or the other, right?
Yeah. True.
Okay. And we have the Darshan Dwar.
This Darshan Dwar, it was basically for the temples, the Gurudwara, the Sikh temple. And you can see those triangles in kind of dome shape, which represents the Gurudwara, right? So this was basically for a religious ceremony where it was presented to the Gurudwaras. Not anymore, because now they go in for more ornate and blingy things. But earlier the women would embroider it themselves and present it for any kind of a, function in the family. They would present it to the temple, and it would be displayed over there. It would be over the book where we keep a holy book. On top of it, as a canopy, it would be displayed there. So this was Darshan Dwar, basically for the temples.
Right, and darshan means, I guess, homage to God,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So when I visited the Golden Temple in Amritsar, which is Sikhism's holiest shrine or temple, I would say, they had basically people have been there. You know that it's very beautiful. There's a golden temple, and then there's a moat around it. There's water around it, and then from the temple itself to another location, they are carrying the holy book every night to put it to sleep. Basically, to take it away from where it does all the work, I guess. And so would that, I'm seeing in this one, in this particular one, I see that these domes and there's people in there. Would that have any significance to it, or it's just, it just denotes a temple? It doesn't mean the taking of the holy book, does it?
No. I don't think so, because that was, it's just there in Golden Temple, where the temple is in the center. Not all the Gurudwaras are like that.
Mm-hmm.
But this could be just, this is not donating that. This is just those doorways. And maybe those doorways represent the temple as such.
The temple.
And
it
now, could be any temple.
Yeah, and now you say that there's more of a bling aspect to these, because, which is quite interesting, how these textiles, which are so painstakingly embroidered, and the point is that they don't have bling, and people want bling, like the mass sensibility wants shiny bling with sequins or whatever. And again, this is something that I can relate to coming from Gujarat, which is one of the finest I guess textiles coming out of Gujarat is the double ikat patola. And the sad thing is that people don't wear the double ikat patola, the Patan patola, at weddings, because it does not have enough bling or shine, and so they wear a lot of zardosi, they wear a lot of zari. But sadly, the finest textile coming out of India, hand woven textile, or Gujarat anyway, is not to be seen. So it's very interesting how we're kind of moving towards a more and more of a showmanship culture here. Yeah. Okay, so now we have this one.
This is a Kaudi bag. Kaudi is shell, right? So it's a shell in Punjabi. And this is a geometric design, but it's got those little white patterns which represent a shell. From far away, it seems like a shell. So this is a Kaudi bag, which is anywhere you will see these triangles with a little white in the center. That is called as a Kaudi bag, the shells.
Right.
So, yeah.
Very beautiful. And so they wouldn't actually have shells embroidered on this either, would they? It's not like a...
No. So this represents the shells. The look is like the shells.
Okay. And here we have the choke.
And of course, the choke, like Mannat has already mentioned, it's both the sides look very similar. And it was usually on a red base. And more of it, a golden thread was used. Very few other colors were used, but they were like really less. And in this particular bag, this was given to the granddaughter before her wedding. When they wear those red bangles, that's the time the grandmother would give it to the granddaughter. And this was never finished. The borders, the edges of this specific bag, the choke, they're never finished. They're, she wanted unlimited happiness, prosperity for the granddaughter. That's why they were never finished. The corners were never finished. They were just two straight lines on the border, but parallel lines which were not finished till the ends, representing unlimited happiness and prosperity for the granddaughter.
That's such a lovely concept. So it's not finished off because you don't want to limit your happiness. I love that. I think I'm going to start borrowing that from all my, what I call my UFOs, my unfinished objects, right? So,
the most interesting bit is I tell this, anybody who wants a choke, I tell them this, and then I want them, because there was a customer who wanted me to finish it. She says, that's okay. I told her the story. I said, you take a call. You want it finished, you want it unfinished. So she says, that's okay. I have a son, so I'm not giving it to my daughter. But if I was to, and my sister's going to buy it for her daughter, so we'll leave hers unfinished. But mine you can finish because I'm going to pass it on to my daughter-in-law, so it's okay. I said, all right.
Yeah, it's fascinating. All right, so then the process of Fulkari, then let's talk about how it was done back then.
Okay. So obviously the process has changed a lot since what it was before and what it is now. So first I'll be talking about the process which was there like many years ago before industrialization happened. A lot of other things happened. So during the time, all the fulkari was made on khadar, on khadi, and so there was a little a rough material and a coarser material compared to the materials which are used today. So this khadi was hand spun at home itself, and then first they like spun the thread, and then they made some cloth out of it to start the fulkari. And then also this was usually dyed either at home or by the local dyer, which was called the lalari back then. So, and the threads which were used on top for embroidery were the silk threads, like I guess Gavi Singh also mentioned in the chats right now. So these were silk threads which were used. And also a place,
this was actually, just a minute, this was actually an untwisted thread which was called as pat earlier. And yes, but it doesn't last too long, this thread. So that's why all the vintage bags, if you have like the one which you have at the back also, with a little bit of use also, you'll see the thread wearing off.
Right, right. So there are they spun silk? Do you think?
This was untwisted floss thread, but it would age with time. It would age and it would just wear off.
Right, right. They're more delicate, I guess, than the ground itself, which is khadi, which is quite sturdy.
Sturdy, yeah.
Right. Should we go on to the next one?
I just
do you want to
talk a couple of things from the
previous one? Okay.
So there was also so there were also little mentions I read somewhere that the silk thread was used because so Punjab actually came in the silk route which was there from China. So it was they're like it crossed Punjab. So there were people who took the silk from there and then used it. It looks very shiny and glossy. So if you compare it with an anchor thread or a cotton thread, this looks much more glossier and prettier. But the only problem, like Mom mentioned before, was that after a few wears, the thread starts wearing off, and you cannot really wear it. So, like, you cannot use it for daily objects. To be honest. So yeah.
Right, right.
So
okay, and I guess it being part of the silk route, that's where the silk came from. From probably China or Central Asia, which had more sericulture. There would have been, that's where they would have got the silk from. All right, so let's go on to what it looks like now.
Yes, so right now I'll be explaining the process which is there right now. So first, it's dyed on a commercial scale, of course. So we go to a local dye shop and they get the cloth, dyed, and the cloth is the finer materials. They're not hand woven. They are made on the machines. Currently we're using organza or chinon chiffon, georgette, things like that. And before this, prior to this, it was usually done by memory. All the designs were made from whatever was around. But right now, a trace is created to map out the design which has to be there on the fulkari. So everything is even and everything is already thought of before the fulkari started. Another thing which is there is the use of a frame, which is used to embroider. Earlier to this, it was just made without a frame, which was actually very surprising, and also from the back. So currently, they make it from the front of the fulkari, like most of the embroideries are. But typically, fulkari was done from the back and without a frame and without a trace, which is quite a very interesting thing. Like when I also see somebody who does it the traditional way, it's just so mesmerizing to see them.
Right.
We have a few artisans who are still following that same thing without a frame and without any trace. But there are very few left who do that.
Yeah. And why do you think they didn't use a frame? Because it wasn't that technology wasn't available to them. I call it technology
Yeah,
hesitatingly, but that's what it is. It wasn't
one of
available to
the
them.
one of the reasons could be that, and the other reason was they would do it on a khadi thread. You know, the khadi thread is more coarse, and then you could count the number of threads. It was okay, but now it's on finer material, so it's very difficult to count. Or the
Right.
this
Yeah.
cloth, the base material is not that stiff,
Right.
so
Right.
then it's difficult to embroider that way.
And now, as you said, there's more and more machine made fulkari flooding the market, and sometimes
Oh,
it's
yes.
difficult to even tell the difference, isn't it? I mean, I got fooled a couple of times when I was in Punjab, and I couldn't tell. But I mean, it's not this sort of thing. Usually, if it's on khadi, then you can tell right away just by flipping it over, and you can tell that it's hand done. But when you look at something that's done on georgette or a finer fabric like that, it's very difficult to tell, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now they've started, these machine-made ones. There's another thing they've started using the same thread, which we use for hand embroidery. So they're using the same thread. It gives the same look. So a person who's not aware can really be fooled easily. You think, oh, it's such a fine work of embroidery, but of course, with the price you can make out. But otherwise,
Well,
it's very difficult. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so let's have a quick look at how Fulkari is similar to other embroideries of within India and also around the world.
So the first one is the Suti. The Suti is from Karnataka. The image on the left is of Suti embroidery. It's somewhat related to chope. The designs are pretty similar. So in fact, even this is done back and forth. And when I could not really find how to go ahead with chope, so this is what I actually saw to get an idea and get a reference to while learning for chope. So this is the Suti. Next.
Right.
Okay, so this is Soop embroidery. This is typically done in Gujarat and some parts of Pakistan. The motifs are very similar. It's hand embroidered, but still it's much finer compared to what Fulkari is. So yeah.
Yeah. I see a lot of this when I go to Bhuj. Yeah. And from Japan.
The last one is ancient Japanese woven silk. So the motifs which are used and the way they're used are very similar to how Fulkari is, though this is obviously woven into the fabric and Fulkari is typically done like embroidered onto the fabric, but the motifs are pretty similar.
Right. And I think, again, this is all about the very art of any textile we're counting, its warp and weft. And so that creates almost like a mini grid, doesn't it? And so then everything gets geometric in a way. Yeah. Okay. Afghani embroidery.
So yeah, Afghani embroidery. So the image on the left, first one, is of Afghani embroidery, which is done on the dari or a carpet. And the motifs also are pretty similar to the motifs which are used typically in Fulkari. The second two images, the one on the center and one on the right, are images of Fulkari which are there. And the first one is obviously Afghani embroidery, which is from Afghanistan. And they do have some similarities between them.
Okay.
Okay. Now we'll just shift on what is happening now in the market, what is available. Over a period of time, they have changed the motifs completely. The stitches and the motifs have been completely changed. You can see the one in blue, this lady she's wearing. That's the modern Fulkari, what you get in the market. Just the geometric design is the same. Otherwise, the stitches and they've changed. All right, the base has been changed. The colors used have been changed. The motifs have been the only similarity left with Fulkari is the geometric design. And then, of course, you're getting a lot of machine-made Fulkari in the market. And there's this second one, which is sold as Fulkari, but it is not Fulkari at all. This is done by wool, the one in yellow. It's done in wool, but if you search on the net, you will find this as Fulkari. It's sold as Fulkari. Where it's done, it's not done in Punjab. And I don't know how the name came to be Fulkari.
Yeah, this is interesting how this is transcending. I mean, there's also things like Kantha from West Bengal, which is being taken up by different parts in India, and it's called Kantha just because it's kind of a running stitch, quilting stitch kind of thing. And so this is from Punjab, but it's being done in Bhuj. But there's Bhuj embroidery that's being done, or in Kutchi embroidery that's done elsewhere. It's called Rabari embroidery, but it's not. So it's very interesting. I think this is what's happening with so much social sharing, Pinterest and Instagram and everything out there. So this is what social media, this is what basically the internet has done for
Yeah,
traditional,
exactly.
yeah.
And then, of course, a lot of traces are used now. Most of the fulkaris are done with trace. There are very, very few artisans who are left who do it without the trace. And we are training girls who are doing it without the trace. And they are managing. Earlier, they started with khadi, but they are now managing on the finer materials also, like chiffons, georgettes, without the trace too. So these are the basic things, what is available in the market right now. How it has changed.
Okay.
Now the problem what we're facing is the younger generation is not really into fulkari. Maybe they are not getting good fulkari, so they are not enjoying the fulkari, which is the commercial fulkari. So they are not really in for fulkari. Like when I started fulkari, my fulkari was a little different. But when I spoke to somebody and she's like, "Oh, fulkari, not my cup of tea. I would rather just wear it for a wedding for few minutes and then I don't want." But then I showed what really my own fulkari, and she says, yes, this one I don't mind. So the younger generation is actually, maybe because of commercialization, maybe because of how it has deteriorated over a period of time, they really don't want to wear fulkaris. And of course the quality thread, we really need to work on the thread, because as we talked about, the butt which was used earlier and now also, it's not a long lasting thread. The embroidery which is done with this flossy thread, the butt thread, it comes off, it entangles with your maybe ring or bangles if you're wearing, and it entangles and the threads come off. So you can't wear it on a suit if you're wearing fulkari. It can't be worn for more than 4 or 5 times because the threads come out.
No, one thing, Preeti, I've heard over again is that of all the textile revivals that are going on right now in the Indian subcontinent, I think Fulkari has suffered the most because, can you shed some light on that? Because it doesn't seem like, is it the fact that it wasn't done for commercial purposes, or do you think there's some other reason?
See, one thing, yes, of course, it was not done for commercial reasons. And I realized, in other embroideries, men were involved. So in Fulkari, somehow men are not involved at all. It's just women doing it for women. So when it comes to women, it is the secondary, source of income, and it's not taken seriously. That's one thing. And like some flaws, in Punjab, everybody wants to go to Canada. So that's the latest. We just before this, a month back, Manat and I, we had gone to all our artisans. I just wanted to go and chat with them and click a few pictures, and we wanted to know what about their children. So can you imagine, 98% of them, they said their children wanted to go abroad. And just one of my artisans who does this chope, just because Mannat was learning chope, so her daughter thought she wanted to learn. Otherwise, aim is Canada. So the younger generation, they
I
are
actually
not in
tried
for
to.
it. Yeah. Manna tried to convince her.
I actually tried to convince this girl, the one, the only lady who does chope. So I tried to convince her daughter that you should try to get into this, and there are possibilities. You also, like in India, you get scholarships for being a child of an artisan in all the textile schools. So I could probably help you out with that. You could get admitted there and stuff like that. But she was so convinced that no, I want to go to Canada and then I'll see where it takes me. So probably over there I can do it, but not over here. So
no,
yeah, that's the state right now.
Yeah. Painful to hear that, but
yeah, it's very sad. It's very sad.
Yes, and now we come to what Fusion Fulkari does. Fusion Fulkari, by the way, is the company, the commercial arm of Preeti and Manat's efforts. And tell us what you do.
Yeah, so we're just trying to revive the actual old Fulkari. Here, what we're doing is we are taking all the old motifs, and we're using most of the colors also in the threads. We are using the colors which were used earlier. There were 4 to 5 colors: a hot pink, orange, a lighter green, and an off-white color or a blue sometimes. So we're trying to make the fulkaris where most of those colors are used. Yes, thread for cushions, for other things, we are using cotton thread so that it lasts longer. We are making ottomans and all. So there we're using cotton thread so that, it doesn't wear off so soon. And then we are using the modern materials. We are using hand woven silk. We are using georgettes, organza, so that the newer generation, they can adapt to it. They can relate to it. So the motifs are rolled, the colors are rolled, the colors of the fabric or the fabric itself is newer. So we're using a fusion, and we want the younger generation to carry on the tradition. And I'm quite happy they're enjoying it.
Right. Fabulous. Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful things.
So these are a few cushions which we've made.
Oops, sorry. Oh, where am I now? Let's just see. Okay, yeah. Is this the right slide? Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's okay. So what we're doing is we're trying to empower women. We have more than 20 women, and every day I do get calls from other women who want to join us. And so we're focusing on these women. We're trying to teach them few little techniques here and there. Like I told you, we taught them first in khadi, then we're shifting to finer, and they're adopting to it. And then we're providing them mental and physical health care, which is so important. We've realized in their case, women here, I don't know whether it's all over, but they are the neglected lot. Their priority is their husband, their children, their house, but their own health is the last in their list. Mm-hmm. So, once in a while we do call up and we ask them about their families, everything, and that's what they wait for. I realized if I don't do that, then, I get a call, is everything okay with you? Whenever I get a piece, once I was very busy, I didn't call back and say, oh, it's beautiful. So she's like, oh, did you like it? Because they look forward to it. They said, you are the only person who cares for us. So which is really sad, Nobody in the family is bothered about their health. So we're getting their checkups done off and on. And usually most of them are anemic, less vitamin D, getting the test done, giving them these things. So they feel that there's somebody who's taking care. Mm-hmm. And which is just something really, really important, I think, to give to these women. And they're doing a great job, and they don't know that they're doing a great job. So so making them realize the self-worth, giving them lectures that you are worth something. And one of them, a young girl, she'd almost left it. She was having problems with her in-laws, with her husband. So I had to, really tell her, talk to her off and on, that you are worth so much. You come on, you start doing your work. You'll have your own money, independence. And she's back. She's getting back into the thing, and she really thanks me for that. So we're trying to really, work on women empowerment.
So, Preeti, are there NGOs that are working in this sector in Punjab? Because I'm thinking of in Gujarat and Kutch, there's more than 50 NGOs, I think, that are working in the sector, particularly in textiles and textile revival. Small, large, some of them are very well known, and some of them are like feeder NGOs into the larger ones. I don't come across many NGOs working in Punjab.
There are not many. If there's some good work being done by one of the NGOs, but then they don't have work to give these ladies. They've trained them, they're well trained, but then they don't have work for these ladies. So then there's no point teaching them an art, and then they're sitting there and waiting for them to give them work.
So there has to be the demand. The demand has
to be demand, and it has to go on. I mean, they know that they're going to get work all the time. So then they all keep, calling me. That's what I feel. If I want to close down my business, I can't do that because so many women are, waiting there for me. I can't do that.
Yeah. Okay. So here's some of your patterns, right? So we saw this.
This is a replication of old, this is a thirma, which we've done on linen. Khadi is too heavy. So just to replicate and give it a vintage look, we've done it on linen. So linen drapes little well, and it's easier to carry. And now we're doing lots of replications on hand-spun silk. So that they just, the old bags, we're just replicating them on silk.
Lovely.
So it's wearable.
Okay, so this is what I was so excited when you showed me this slide, and I thought, oh my goodness, I never knew And remember when we went through this in the test run, I said, is that the back or is that a backing? And you said, no, that's the back. I could not believe how fine this is. And then of course our friends Mangi and Katie, they loaned me this Fulkari and I saw it for myself, and I still can't, I am just blown away by how fine the Fulkari. I mean, this is stitch by stitch, you can see this
and
fabulous.
it's all done from the back.
Yeah, and this Fulkari is about 8 by 5, 8 feet by 5. So you can imagine the amount of work that has gone into it. It's just, it's mind blowing, honestly. Yeah. So this,
in fact, in this picture itself. So in this picture, you can see one white line of which is joining two cloths. So these Fulkaris, all these old Fulkaris are pretty broad, and one piece of cloth doesn't fit in. So most of the Fulkaris which are old, you see that there are two cloths which are joined together to create one big piece. So even in this, you can see that it's joined from the center, like two different material cloths are joined together.
Because on the loom, only a small part was fitted, so they would, join 3 pieces and then start embroidering.
Yes, beautiful, beautiful work. All right,
this is a Chand Bagh, a replication again on linen we have done, and we're doing it on chinon chiffon as well. So this is on black base. We're doing it on other bases also. And actually, this white color looks like silver when it's too much of it all together. So it does look like a Chand Bagh. So this person wanted some peacocks as well. And there's one interesting thing. Some of the bags, they have continuous design, and a part of it a different color or a different design. So over a period of time, we've realized that's called as Nazar Booty. If something used to be really nice, they would place a different color or a little design change so that,
so it would be like to draw the evil eye.
Evil eye.
And yes, this is
so that it doesn't really, spoil or something doesn't happen.
Yes, this is something that is quite, I think, throughout many cultures in the East.
Yeah. And this is an ottoman. This is again a vintage bag. We've copied it, and this is all in cotton thread, and which is going to last. So we've just copied the same design in an ottoman. Just trying to do it differently.
Beautiful, beautiful. So now, thank you. That concludes the presentation by Preeti and Manat. And if there's been quite a lively chat going on, I can see there's there's a lot of questions that have already been answered by Gavi Singh and her lean core, and Nuzhat Rashid had a few questions as well. But there have been a few questions. I'll just kind of scroll and put them out there for people, and then we'll have a bit of a forum as soon as all the questions are answered. Then I can ask you to unmute yourself. And so I think Gavi, you had something about the bling. Of course, I agree absolutely. For the I think for the uninitiated, I won't say the uneducated, I'd say the uninitiated, people who don't appreciate handmade textiles, for them, they really don't know, the value, or they can't appreciate. And then once that world opens up, you cannot see anything else, and you start seeing the magic of handmade or hand embroidered. So that's what we're trying to do with this. Are these all spun silk? I think we answered that question. The base fabric, Gavi has told you, was hand spun sturdy cotton. And I think most of your questions, and now I think there was a question where somebody said, can you recommend some reading material? So I would request Preeti and Manat to please put together some reading material if you are following any books, or you've looked at if there's any books on Fulkari, and we'll be sharing that with everybody who attended today. Parsi Gara, I think Gavi had a question about Parsi Gara, and I think Parsi Gara is very different from Fulkari,
because so much it's not florals and birds.
I was just going to say it's not geometric at all. I think Parsi Gara is very different. You can tell right away. It has almost like I would almost say like a chinoiserie, like a Chinese influence to the Parsi motifs, right? Because that's where it came from. You got a question about trace, which has been answered. Thank you, Harleen, for answering that. Company for purchasing. and the contact information is coming up. So Gabby had a question. She said, please, can you show us some of your handcrafted Fulkari articles? I think maybe on your website you would have that, right? I'm thinking that okay, sorry, hang on, just let me see. All right, so here's information about if you wanted to contact Fusion Fulkari, you can contact them, or you can follow them on Instagram at Fusion Fulkari, and you have a Gmail address there as well. And yeah, and
one question, Sheila, I had read somebody was talking about that this Fulkari from the back is done in Pakistan. But no, it's being done in India as well. And in fact, in Pakistan, it's just, I think they're still doing it on khadi or cotton based. They're not doing it on finer materials. But here in India, we have artisans who are doing from the back and without a trace, without a frame, and on finer materials.
Right, yes. Yeah. These are artists in Pakistan who are still doing Fulkari from the back. But yeah, I mean, this is from, I guess, what is right now is India, so it's difficult. And as you're saying, you're reviving this, doing it from the back as well. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share right now.
A little thing I would like to add to someone who asked about the trace. So yeah, like somebody had already explained. So the trace is, the whole drawing is first sort of block printed or just printed on the on the cloth. So this basically gives uniformity throughout the, it's a repetition of pattern. So it gives uniformity throughout the patta or the stole, wherever it's been embroidered. But the work, like all these artisans who do it from the back, the ones who've been doing it from the traditional methods. So I did see that this girl, so once when she had to replicate the design, so obviously the distance, you really can't possibly have the exact distance every single time when you're replicating the pattern. So she just took a stick, she chopped it off into this smaller piece, and every time she just used to place that stick, and that was her source of measurement for the whole thing. So that was a very interesting concept which they used.
They don't use the measuring tape or else, they just have a stick. So they cut the stick, and then they keep putting it, and then the booties or the those they can replicate at the same
fascinating
distance.
There's always a more direct, low-tech way of doing something. All right. So I think we've got all the questions answered, and we're going to, in case there is nothing else you want answered, we are going to wrap up now. Okay, so anybody else, you want to weigh in on anything? No? Anyway, have a very good morning in India, and everybody else have a great evening. I feel like I'm on high when I look at beautiful textiles. Isn't that just so wonderful that we're able to just transport ourselves? We are taking a bit of a break. We will be back in September. We are going to the Ajanta Caves with Professor Robert Caroli. And so watch out. In August, we're taking a little bit of a break. I am off, hopefully, to Cape Breton on the motorbike. So I will see you in September.
I heard about that. Be safe.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye.